I was standing in the center of my wedding venue with a clipboard in one hand and a coffee that had gone cold in the other when my phone buzzed. It wasn't my fiancé, Daniel. It wasn't my mother. It was my boss, Victoria Langford, CEO of Langford Events, the woman who had spent the last 6 years telling everyone that loyalty was the foundation of success. I answered because that's what I always did. Emily, she said without even saying hello, I need a favor. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. I looked around the ballroom as workers adjusted crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon sunlight. Florists were placing white roses exactly where I had imagined they would be nearly 18 months earlier when Daniel and I signed the contract. It wasn't just a venue. It was the place where my late father had walked through with me before he passed away. He had smiled and said, "This room already feels like a promise." I swallowed before answering. "What kind of favor?" Victoria laughed softly. "The kind only you can do." Something in my stomach tightened. "I need you to give your wedding date to my daughter." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes every sound in the room disappear. Even the workers seemed farther away. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "I don't understand. You booked the Grand Willow Estate almost 2 years ago." "Yes." "Olivia fell in love with it yesterday." Another pause. "She wants it." I actually waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. Victoria continued speaking as though she were discussing office supplies. "You'll move your wedding to another venue." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my mind refused to believe another explanation didn't exist. "My invitations are already mailed." "I know." "The caterer is confirmed." "I know." "My family is flying in from 4 states." "I know." She sighed. "I'll write you a recommendation letter if that's what you're worried about." A recommendation for giving away the day I'd been planning for 18 months. I looked across the ballroom toward the stained glass windows. Daniel had proposed beneath those same windows during an open house. We hadn't chosen this place because it was expensive. We chose it because it was ours. "I can't do that." Victoria didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "It would be unfortunate if your answer affected your future here." There it was. Not a request. A warning. I closed my eyes. For 6 years, I had worked weekends, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, answered emails after midnight, covered for managers who forgot deadlines, stayed loyal. And suddenly my wedding had become another company resource. I said no. She inhaled slowly. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning." The call ended. No goodbye. No apology. Nothing. For almost a minute, I stood perfectly still. The florist approached with a smile. "Everything okay?" I forced one back. "Just work." It was easier than explaining that my career had just collided with the happiest day of my life. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later carrying sandwiches. He took one look at my face. "What happened?" I handed him the phone. He listened to the voicemail Victoria had left after I refused. Her exact words: "Think carefully before choosing emotion over opportunity." Daniel looked at me. "She actually said this?" I nodded. He laughed once. A quiet, stunned laugh. "She thinks she owns people." I didn't answer, because part of me wondered if maybe she did, at least professionally. By Monday morning, she could fire me. We still owed money on the photographer. The honeymoon wasn't fully paid. Our apartment lease renewed in 6 weeks. Real life isn't built on dramatic speeches. It's built on bills. Daniel reached across the table. "We'll figure it out." I smiled. But fear has a way of sitting quietly beside hope. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the conversation. Not because of what she'd asked, because of how easily she'd asked it. As though my life could simply be rearranged to improve hers. At 6:12 the next morning, my phone rang again. "Victoria." I let it ring. Then another call. Then another. Finally a text. "Have you made the right decision?" Not your decision. The right decision. As if those were automatically the same thing. I typed one word. "No." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally her message arrived. "Then don't bother coming to work Monday unless you're prepared to discuss your priorities." I stared at the screen. 6 years. Reduced to one sentence. Welcome back to Reality Drama Story, where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you are new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. People often ask when betrayal begins. They imagine it starts with a dramatic argument, a scream, a slammed door. They're wrong. Betrayal begins in tiny moments. The meeting you're suddenly left out of, the credit someone else receives, the invitation that never arrives. Looking back, I realized Victoria had been preparing me to become replaceable long before she asked for my wedding. I just hadn't seen the blueprint. When I joined Langford Events, I was 26, fresh out of graduate school. My father was still alive then. He worked as a carpenter. He believed every building told the truth. You can hide problems with paint, he'd tell me while sanding oak beams. But the structure always remembers. I didn't understand those words until years later. Dad never met a stranger. He measured success by handshakes instead of bank accounts. When I got my first job offer, he framed the acceptance letter, not because it paid well, because he believed someone had finally seen my worth. The frame still hangs in my hallway. Its corners are worn now, but I haven't taken it down. Sometimes memories deserve better foundations than people do. Victoria seemed impressive when we first met. Confident, elegant, sharp without being cruel. At least that's what everyone believed. She remembered birthdays, sent flowers when employees lost relatives, donated to local charities. Clients adored her. The magazines called her one of the city's most influential businesswomen. I believed every headline, until the small cracks began to appear. The first time she took credit for my work, I convinced myself it was politics. The second time, I called it teamwork. By the fifth time, I had stopped correcting anyone, because promotions depended on staying agreeable. My father used to say that termites never announce themselves. Neither do selfish people. They simply keep eating until the floor gives way beneath someone else. I still didn't think she'd come after my personal life. I was wrong, and I had no idea that Monday morning would become the day everything I'd built would either collapse or reveal a stronger foundation hidden underneath. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the kind of steady rain that blurred every building into the next. It felt fitting. The city looked as uncertain as I did. Daniel kissed my forehead before I left the apartment. You don't owe anyone your happiness. I know. If she asks again, I'll tell her the same thing. He smiled, but I could see the concern he tried to hide. We weren't wealthy. My paycheck covered almost half of our monthly expenses. Walking away wasn't just emotional. It was financial. As I drove downtown, I passed the small hardware store where my father used to buy lumber. For a second, I almost stopped. He would have known what to say, not because he understood corporate politics, because he understood people. And people, he often reminded me, reveal themselves when they believe they have all the power. Langford Events occupied the top 3 floors of a glass building overlooking the river. Normally, the reception desk buzzed with conversations. That morning, it was strangely quiet. Several coworkers looked up as I walked through the lobby. Then they quickly looked away. No one said good morning. That was unusual. Sarah, one of the junior coordinators, hurried toward me while pretending to organize folders. She whispered without making eye contact. Victoria already knows you're here. I assumed she would. She called everyone into the conference room 20 minutes ago. Why? Sarah hesitated. I think. This is about you. Before I could ask another question, the elevator doors opened. Victoria's executive assistant stepped out. Emily Ems. Langford would like to see you immediately. Of course she would. Victoria's office overlooked the entire skyline. The room always reminded me of a museum. Everything expensive. Nothing personal. She stood beside the windows with her back to me. Without turning around, she said, I was disappointed by your text. I figured. She finally faced me. Perfect suit. Perfect makeup. Perfect smile. None of it reached her eyes. I've been very generous with your career. I've worked hard for my career. She ignored that. My daughter cried all weekend. I waited. She believes you've ruined the most important day of her life. I blinked. My wedding is in 19 days. Exactly. As is mine. Victoria folded her hands. You're young. So is Olivia. You can marry next year. I stared at her, trying to understand whether she truly believed what she was saying, or whether years of getting everything she wanted had erased the difference between desire and entitlement. She walked to her desk. "I've already spoken with the venue." My heartbeat slowed. "What do you mean?" "They said the reservation could technically be transferred." Transferred. She had already contacted my venue, without asking me. They also informed me the remaining balance is due Friday. I knew that. I could pay it today. There it was again. Not kindness. Leverage. "I don't need you to pay for my wedding." "No." She smiled. "You need me to continue employing you." The room became painfully quiet. I realized this conversation had never been about the venue. It was about obedience. She slid a document across the desk. "I had human resources prepare this." I looked down. It wasn't termination paperwork. It was a promotion. Senior Operations Director. 24% salary increase. Company vehicle. Annual bonus. Effective immediately. One condition. At the bottom, clipped neatly to the contract, sat another page. I already knew what it was before reading it. Wedding venue transfer agreement. My stomach tightened. Victoria leaned back. "You've earned this." "No." "I believe you have." "No." I pushed both papers back. "I mean, this isn't a reward." Her smile disappeared. "It's a purchase." Neither of us spoke. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Finally, she said, "Everyone has a price." My father used to disagree. She laughed. "Your father built houses. He built character first." For the first time, irritation crossed her face. "Emily." "No." One word. "Calm." "City." "Final." She pressed a button on her phone. "Send everyone in." The conference room doors opened. Managers entered one after another. Accounting, marketing, operations, human resources. Nearly 20 people. I recognized confusion on several faces. Victoria addressed the room. "Emily has decided she's no longer committed to this company." That wasn't what happened. No one interrupted. She continued. "She's allowing personal priorities to interfere with organizational needs." Organizational needs. Apparently my wedding now qualified as a business obstacle. She looked toward me. "Would you like to explain yourself?" Every face turned in my direction. I counted them. 19. 19 coworkers. Some sympathetic. Some uncomfortable. Some pretending not to listen. I remembered something my father once said while repairing a church roof. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest beam in the building. So I stayed silent. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Victoria became uncomfortable. Good. She wanted emotion. She wanted an argument. She wanted me to sound irrational. Instead, I simply asked, "Is this meeting about my work performance?" "No." "Have I missed project deadlines?" "No." "Have clients complained?" "No." "So this meeting is about my wedding." Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at Victoria. One of the senior planners quietly lowered his eyes. Another crossed her arms. Victoria answered, "This meeting is about loyalty." I nodded. "I agree." Then I picked up the promotion paperwork, folded it once, placed it neatly back on her desk. "I'm loyal." I looked around the room. But loyalty isn't ownership. Without another word, I walked out. Behind me, nobody spoke. Not one person. Sometimes silence says everything. By lunchtime, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Texts, calls, emails. Most were from coworkers. "What happened? Are you okay? Is the rumor true?" Rumors travel faster than elevators. By 1 o'clock, the story had somehow become that I'd refused a promotion because I was emotionally unstable. Victoria wasn't wasting time. Neither would I. I opened my laptop at a coffee shop across the street. Instead of updating my resume, I opened something else. A folder I hadn't looked at in almost 8 months. Its name was simple. Contracts. Inside sat hundreds of files from projects I'd managed over 6 years. Vendor agreements. Client correspondence. Budget revisions. Signed approvals. Nothing unusual. Except one folder. Executive authorizations. I hadn't created it intentionally. The files accumulated automatically because Victoria preferred forwarding sensitive approvals through my email before signing them herself. She trusted me. Or maybe she underestimated me. Either way, every approval had timestamps, digital signatures, financial authorizations, property agreements. Nothing illegal. At least not that I knew. But there was one document I suddenly remembered seeing months earlier. A confidential agreement involving a private investment company. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, I wondered why it had been marked attorney eyes only before accidentally being copied into my archive. My cursor hovered over the folder. Before I could open it, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. A calm older man's voice spoke. Is this Emily Carter? Yes. My name is Richard Holloway. I don't think we've met. No. A pause. But I've represented the owners of Grand Willow Estate for 14 years. Every muscle in my body tightened. I'm calling because someone has been making unusual requests regarding your wedding reservation. I looked out the coffee shop window toward the Langford building across the street. Richard continued quietly. I don't believe you're aware of everything that's happening. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? Another pause. Then he said 7 words that changed everything. Your venue isn't what they're really after. The line went silent. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked back at the Langford building across the street. Hundreds of employees walked through the revolving doors, completely unaware that my entire career had unraveled before lunch. Richard Holloway cleared his throat. "Ems, Carter? I'm here. I apologize for calling unexpectedly, but I believe someone is attempting to use your reservation for purposes beyond hosting a wedding." What purposes? I'd rather explain in person. That answer only deepened the mystery. I've represented Grand Willow Estate for 14 years, he continued. In that time, I've learned never to discuss sensitive matters over the phone. When? Now. 35 minutes later, I pulled into the estate's private parking lot. The ballroom looked exactly as it had the day before. Peaceful. Beautiful. Untouched. It was strange how a place could remain so calm while the lives connected to it fell apart. Richard Holloway greeted me inside the administration office. He looked to be in his late 60s. Gray suit, round glasses, measured voice. The kind of man who chose every word carefully. He shook my hand. Thank you for coming. You said the venue isn't what they're after. He nodded. I did. He motioned toward a conference room. Once the door closed, he slid a thick file across the polished oak table. My name was printed across the front. Emily Carter. Reservation #GW2047. I reviewed your contract after receiving several unusual inquiries. Inquiries from Victoria and someone else. I frowned. Who? Her attorney. That stopped me. My boss hired an attorney over my wedding? Richard folded his hands. Not exactly. He opened the file. 3 weeks ago, your reservation became unusually valuable. I stared at him. I don't understand. He pulled out a newspaper clipping. The headline read, Historic Willow Estate Approved for National Preservation Grant. I remember seeing something about this. Most people ignored it. What does that have to do with my wedding? He leaned forward. The grant includes a private gala held immediately after the final private wedding hosted before renovations begin. I blinked. So your wedding. Silence. Richard continued. The couple holding that final reservation receives lifetime membership privileges, exclusive access to future charity events, and media recognition during the reopening. I looked back at the contract. I never knew any of this. You weren't supposed to. Why not? Because the grant hadn't been approved when you signed. I slowly pieced it together. Victoria wasn't obsessed with the ballroom. She wanted everything attached to it. The publicity, the photographs, the invitations, the guest list, the prestige. And she wanted her daughter standing where history would be made. Richard reached into the folder again. There's something else. He placed another document in front of me. This one carried handwritten notes. The Langford family requested permission to substitute your names with Olivia Langford and Ethan Brooks. They actually submitted paperwork? Yes. My permission wasn't included. No. Then why was it accepted? It wasn't. Relief washed over me. For now. Those 2 words landed heavily. The request was denied because the contract contains an unusual clause. What clause? Richard smiled for the first time. The original owners insisted every reservation over $100,000 include personal identity protection. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means your contract cannot legally be transferred without signatures from both original parties. Daniel and me. Correct. And if someone forged them? His expression hardened. That would become fraud. For the first time in 2 days, I felt something besides fear. Hope. Not because everything was fixed. Because there were rules. Real ones. Rules Victoria couldn't rewrite simply because she wanted to. Richard slid one final envelope toward me. I think you should have these. Inside were printed emails. Dozens of them. Most involved Victoria's executive assistant. One sentence caught my attention immediately. Emily doesn't know about the preservation announcement yet. Another. Once HR pressures her enough, she'll surrender the reservation voluntarily. Then another. Don't mention the gala benefits until after transfer paperwork is complete. I looked up slowly. They planned this. Richard simply nodded. Very carefully. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Hey. Where are you? At the venue. A pause. Emily. His voice sounded different. What happened? Someone came to the apartment. My heartbeat quickened. Ooh. A woman. Do you know her? No. What did she want? Daniel hesitated. She offered us $200,000. The room became perfectly still. What? Cash. For the venue. Richard quietly lowered his eyes. Daniel continued. When I refused. What happened? She said we'd regret making Olivia cry. The call ended after we agreed to meet at home. Richard stood. I suggest documenting every interaction from this point forward. I intend to. He handed me his business card. If anyone pressures you again, I call you? No. He looked directly into my eyes. You call the police. Driving home, I replayed everything. The transfer requests. The attorney. The hidden emails. The cash offer. This wasn't entitlement anymore. It was strategy. Someone had calculated every move, every conversation, every threat, which meant they expected me to panic. Instead, I became curious. People leave fingerprints when they're convinced nobody is watching. That evening, Daniel spread every document across our dining room table. Receipts, contracts, emails, photographs from our venue visits. The apartment suddenly looked less like a home and more like an investigation room. Daniel pointed toward one email. Look at the date. March 18th. That was nearly a month before Victoria first asked me for the venue. So she already knew. Daniel nodded. This wasn't emotional. No, it was planned. He leaned back in his chair. I think she's underestimated you. I smiled faintly. No. Why not? Because I've underestimated myself. Just after 9 o'clock, another knock came at the apartment door. This time it wasn't a stranger. It was Sarah from work. She looked exhausted. I shouldn't be here. Come in. She stepped inside and immediately locked the door behind her. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. Sarah reached into her purse. I copied these before IT deleted them. She handed me a flash drive. What is it? The executive server backup. I stared at her. Sarah, I know. You could lose your job. She nodded. I probably already have. Tears formed in her eyes. I couldn't watch her destroy another person. Another? Sarah looked away. There were others before you. The room fell silent. Different reasons. She swallowed. Same ending. One resigned after refusing to manipulate client invoices. Another lost a promotion because she wouldn't cancel her honeymoon. A third was quietly pushed out after refusing to lie during an audit. Victoria never exploded. She simply applied pressure. Until people broke. Sarah looked back at me. I don't want you to become number 4. I wrapped my arms around her. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I wasn't standing alone. And somewhere inside Langford Events, more cracks were beginning to spread through the foundation. For the next 3 days, I said almost nothing publicly. That surprised people. Victoria expected a social media post, an emotional resignation, a desperate attempt to defend myself. Instead, I documented everything. Every text, every voicemail, every email, every conversation. My father used to tell me that when a foundation starts shifting, the smartest builder doesn't panic. He measures the damage first. So I measured. Sarah spent 2 evenings helping me organize the files from the flash drive. Together, we created a timeline that stretched back almost 4 years. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Victoria hadn't just manipulated employees. She had built a system around it. If someone questioned her, they were isolated. If they resisted, promotions disappeared. If they continued standing their ground, rumors began. Everything looked legal. Everything looked clean. But together, the documents told a different story. Then Richard called. The board has scheduled its annual donor dinner. When? Friday night. My stomach tightened. My wedding was supposed to be Saturday. I know. There will be over 100 guests, Richard continued. Board members, investors, local media, charity directors. And Victoria? She RSVP'd for herself and Olivia. I already understood. She planned to introduce Olivia as the bride who would supposedly host the estate's historic final wedding. Before anyone knew the truth. Friday evening arrived faster than I expected. Daniel squeezed my hand before we entered. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not. Then why are we here? Because lies travel quickly. I looked toward the ballroom. But the truth usually arrives exactly on time. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Waiters carried silver trays. A string quartet played softly near the staircase. Everything appeared elegant. Then I saw Victoria. She stood near the center of the room surrounded by investors. Olivia laughed beside her while showing guests photographs of the estate. I overheard one sentence. We're honored our family was chosen for the final celebration before restoration begins. My reservation, my wedding, my future, presented as theirs. Daniel gently touched my arm. Ready? I nodded. More than I was last week. Richard approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the room slowly became quiet. Before tonight's presentation regarding the estate's preservation project, there's an important contractual matter requiring clarification. Victoria's smile faded. She hadn't expected Richard to speak first. He continued calmly. The board has asked me to confirm the identity of the couple holding reservation GW2047. Every conversation stopped. Victoria folded her arms. Olivia looked confused. Richard opened a leather folder. The legal reservation holders remain. He looked directly toward us. Emily Carter and Daniel Brooks. A ripple moved through the crowd. Victoria stepped forward immediately. There has been a misunderstanding. Richard didn't argue. He simply held up the signed contract. There has not. She forced another smile. We've already arranged a transfer. No, Richard answered without raising his voice. You requested one. He placed another document on the podium. It was denied. People began whispering. Victoria glanced around the room. She realized she was losing control. She turned toward me. Emily. Her voice became softer. I think we've both allowed emotions to cloud our judgment. This was new. Not anger. Manipulation. I've always considered you family. I almost smiled. Family. Interesting choice. Families don't threaten each other's livelihoods. Families don't secretly contact wedding venues. Families don't offer cash through strangers. I finally spoke. I brought something. Daniel handed me a folder. Inside were printed emails. The transfer requests. The attorney correspondence. The messages discussing pressure tactics. I walked calmly toward Richard, then handed him everything. He passed copies to 2 board members. Neither spoke. They simply read. One page. Then another. Then another. Victoria's confidence began disappearing sentence by sentence. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment and stay with me, because what happens next is something none of them were ready for. One board member looked up. Ems. Langford. His voice remained professional. Did you authorize these communications? Victoria hesitated. They're being taken out of context. Another board member asked. Did you instruct human resources to pressure an employee regarding a private contract? Silence. Did you contact estate attorneys without authorization? Another pause. Olivia slowly looked toward her mother. Mom? Victoria ignored her. Instead, she turned toward me. This doesn't need to become public. I answered quietly. It already is. Then came the anger. You've embarrassed this company. No. You've damaged my daughter's future. No. You've destroyed years of trust. I looked directly at her. You did. She took one step closer. Security instinctively moved between us. She stopped. Then, almost instantly, the anger vanished. Tears appeared. She lowered her voice. I've been under enormous pressure. No one answered. My husband left. Silence. The business hasn't recovered. Another pause. I only wanted Olivia to have something beautiful. For a brief moment, the room felt sympathetic. Then an unexpected voice broke the silence. I buried my husband too. Everyone turned. It was Margaret Ellis, the 72-year-old chairwoman of the Preservation Board. She walked slowly toward Victoria. I've faced bankruptcy. Another step. I've buried a child. Another. I've rebuilt organizations from nothing. She stopped directly in front of Victoria, but never once. Her voice remained perfectly calm. Did I confuse someone else's blessing with my solution? The ballroom became completely silent. Margaret turned toward the board. This discussion is finished. Within 15 minutes, everything changed. The board announced an immediate ethics review. Victoria was asked to surrender her access badge. Her executive authority was suspended pending investigation. She didn't argue. For the first time since I'd met her, she had no words left. Olivia quietly removed the engagement brochure she'd been holding. She walked over to me. I'm sorry. The words surprised me. I didn't know. I believe you. She looked genuinely heartbroken. My mom said you wanted to sell the reservation. I never did. Tears rolled down her face. I would never have agreed if I'd known. I nodded. I know. Sometimes the children inherit the consequences, not the intentions. Exactly 11 days later, the company's board announced Victoria's resignation. 3 senior executives also stepped down after internal investigators uncovered years of unethical employment practices. Sarah got her job back, along with a promotion. Richard personally delivered a handwritten letter confirming our wedding reservation remained fully protected. Inside the envelope was another note. Some contracts protect more than property. They protect character. I still keep that letter. On Saturday, Daniel and I were married exactly where we planned. The stained glass windows glowed in the afternoon sunlight. My father's framed acceptance letter rested quietly on an empty chair in the front row. A small tribute. One seat. One memory. One promise kept. When the ceremony ended, Richard smiled as he handed us the original reservation contract. It's yours now. I folded it carefully. Not because it was expensive, because it reminded me that some victories aren't measured in money. They're measured in what you refuse to surrender. Years later, Sarah became operations director. Margaret remained one of our closest family friends. Olivia eventually sent us a wedding invitation of her own. We attended, without resentment, because forgiveness doesn't erase history. It simply refuses to let history keep writing the future. My father was right all along. Buildings don't collapse because of one broken brick. They collapse because too many small cracks are ignored. People aren't much different. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.